Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Travel Vault webinar. My name is Christina Brazier, and I'm the Operations Director of Travel Vault. I'm joined today by our usual panelists, Matt Purser and Adam Pennyfather from Travel Trade Consultancy, Farina Azam, partner at Kemp Little law firm, and we have a guest panelist with us today, Anthony Kay, Managing Director of Campbell, Irvine, an independent insurance intermediary. As usual, all attendees will be muted for better sound quality, but if you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function on the Zoom app or email me directly and I will keep an eye on my inbox. As usual, the webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel a little later on. You'll also see that we are running a poll this afternoon, just asking a couple of questions on a potential Travel Vault forum for members. Please submit your response for that. It'd be great to hear from you. So without further ado, Matt, quite a bit seems to have happened since our last webinar a couple of weeks ago. Would you be able to give us an overview of the latest developments, please?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everyone. So I guess we can see from, well, lack of reports really that the refund credit notes continue as they were. We're still waiting to see whether the government will actually sign off on that. And for ATOL to actually put out a formal notice on those side of things. It seems to be an accepted form, as I think as the period is going on. I think there's hopefully less and less fight back from it from the public. But I think there's a couple of things just to bear in mind. On the refund credit notes, it still should be a deadline of no further than 31st of March 2021. So there shouldn't be any that go beyond that. I think if you do go beyond that, then I think that potentially will cause problems. The other pieces around, say, we're still waiting for ATOL to release a statement on it. The belief is that they are still ATOL protected. There's a piece from the Air Travel Trust Fund and their policy that sits behind that, which basically says that the Air Travel Trust Fund can make a payment to a consumer who was promised but did not receive a full or partial refund. So I think the belief there is that because it is a refund credit note, the customer hasn't actually received the refund themselves, and therefore if the ATOL holder was to cease trading, that they would be financially protected. So I think that policy is something you probably can quote to your consumers if you are having questions from that from your customers. We can give you specific wording, so maybe Christina, you can send that around afterwards.
Yep, no problem.
The things that have moved though, I guess from we've started to in the UK come out from lockdown slowly. We've seen some of the restrictions eased. We've seen the airlines, I guess, put a lot more information out now about when they're starting to fly, what routes they're starting to fly on. We've seen talks around a possible quarantine in the UK for air bridges, where we'll have agreements with other countries, which would allow us to, as public, to travel to those other countries and maybe not have to follow those quarantine rules. And following on that, I guess with the FCO advice would have to change as well. So things do look like they're starting to move, but they're all sort of hearsay at the moment. We're waiting to see what the meat on the bones will actually be around those proposals and from that. And I guess that what we don't know and we can't guess is what the public's appetite is going to be around starting to travel again, even if the world partially starts to open up again. And I think we're all sort of on tenterhooks waiting to see what happens there. And that's all I really wanted to cover at this moment in time, Chris, if that's okay.
Thanks, Matt. That's helpful. Farina, I think you've got a couple of things to add in terms of legal updates, if you wouldn't mind.
Hello. Yes. No, not at all. I think that the two main issues probably worth touching upon is the BEIS guidance that Matt was just talking about in relation to the credit notes. It did also actually provide some additional information that is particularly helpful for travel companies around the cancellation periods and how far in advance you should be looking at cancellations and cancelling confirmed bookings if you can't provide them. So general advice that we've been giving is that you need to deal with this, or you can deal with this on a 3 to 4 week rolling basis. So you don't need to be looking any further in advance than that. The reason for that is, although we have an FCO advisory against travel in place at the moment, it might change, and it could change, and it will change at some point, and most of the time it will change without any notice. So that sort of, on that basis, you don't need to be cancelling holidays beyond that 3 to 4 week rolling basis. And the BEIS guidance has said that you only need to cancel imminent bookings at this stage, and you can deal with it on the basis of imminent bookings first. So that's basically in line with the advice that we're giving and in line with how the industry is dealing with it. So you are able to deal with the cancellations on this sort of 3 to 4 week rolling basis. Okay, what are the imminent bookings? We can't provide them anymore, and we'll cancel. What it did say, and this is particularly relevant around things like collecting balance payments, because I know one of the issues that a lot of clients are dealing with at the moment is collecting balance payments, customers being very unhappy about that, there being a suggestion that they're collecting balance payments for holidays that they're not going to be able to provide. The BEIS guidance does say that you should not seek payment for a service that you'll be unable to provide. But considering balances are normally due around 60 days in advance of departure, at this stage you don't know that you're not going to be able to provide that service for the same reasons that you're only dealing with bookings on a 3 to 4 week rolling basis. There is that chance that the holiday could still go ahead. There's lots of talk at the moment around things like air bridges, and that although there's talk of quarantine, it's not actually been brought into effect yet, and we don't know where it will. So I think at the moment, as long as you still have that realistic expectation that the holiday might go ahead, then you can still be collecting balance payments on that basis. But I know that it is difficult at the moment when you are looking to collect a balance payment. But if you're but ultimately, in my opinion, I think the BEIS guidance does and is consistent with how the industry is dealing with cancellations and balance payments. There's also been some guidance from the CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority. In relation to travel, it actually only applies to holiday accommodation. It doesn't apply to package holidays. It doesn't apply to flights. So the impact really is around holiday accommodation. But that's not to say, in my opinion, that some of the principles can't apply to things like packages and flights. With the CMA, a lot of it is around fairness of your terms, and that you have to have that inherent fairness in your terms, irrespective of what service you're offering. But it isn't correct, because initially the CMA guidance was sort of promoted as being about holidays, and that isn't right. It's only about holiday accommodation. And that basically gave some guidance around when the CMA would expect customers to receive refunds. And it said if a refund is expected where there's a cancellation by the service provider because they can't provide the services anymore, whether that's a cancellation and whether that's a cancellation and they've not provided any service, or they've had to cancel due to public health measures, but also where the customer cancels or is prevented from receiving the services due to public health measures. So in those circumstances, the CMA would expect customers to receive a full refund. It's worth flagging within the guidance there are some limited exceptions. So where some of the services have already been provided, you would be entitled to deduct a sum to reflect that. Possibly you might also be able to deduct a sum to cover any costs that you've incurred that cannot be recovered elsewhere. So that's, I know with accommodation only, a lot of the time the money has been paid to the accommodation provider already, and the accommodation providers out there are refusing to provide refunds, and so companies are sort of passing that message on to customers, and also to telling customers to go to their insurers. I know that insurers are pushing back on those now on the basis of the CMA guidance. What you really need to be looking at in that situation is, why is the accommodation provider not providing you with a refund? If they were not able to provide the service, then the accommodation provider shouldn't actually be holding on to that payment. And I know there is this general feeling of, but technically we could have provided the accommodation. But if there are restrictions in place, if there are requirements, public health measures in place that makes the provision of that accommodation illegal, that's pretty much the same as making the provision of the accommodation impossible. So in those circumstances, you should expect, and you should be getting a refund from your suppliers. Ultimately, it is going to come down to what the terms and conditions that you have in place with the accommodation provider. But at the end of the day, I think that service, if that service has not been provided, irrespective of who's cancelled, if that accommodation provider couldn't provide the holiday accommodation, or if to do so is illegal, then I would be demanding a full refund from that accommodation provider, and then you'd be able to then pass that on to the customer. So I think potentially that I think what I've been seeing is that some clients are maybe too readily accepting refusals from accommodation providers not to provide refunds because it's accommodation only, and so then they're passing that on to the customer and saying, look, we're not going to get a refund, so we can't pass one on to you. But I think it isn't that simple, especially now the CMA guidance has been published. So you really need to be looking at why you're not getting a refund from that accommodation provider. And that's it really. I think that the two things that I just wanted to talk about was the BEIS guidance and the CMA guidance.
Thanks, Verena. That's really helpful, and it's certainly interesting to hear how that guidance is is coming to start about fairness as well as the legal obligations. We've been having lots of questions as well about when travel starts. So now that certain countries are talking about opening up their borders and airlines starting to operate, holidays potentially might be able to be provided in the next couple of months, but they may not be provided to what the customer expected. So, for example, some issues where you may be quarantined in the destination country, or quarantined when you come back to the UK, or restaurants and attractions might not be open in the destination. Things like that. What you must have had lots of questions on this as well. What are you saying to tour operators about their potential obligations on having to provide these holidays, or whether the customer has a right to refund?
It's going to depend on the situation. If you've got a situation where quarantine is required in the destination country, quarantine, there might be exceptions to this, but as a general rule, where you have to quarantine, you have to do so in a private residence. So if you have a holiday booked to a particular destination, and that destination has a 2-week quarantine rule in place, you're not going to be able to do that because you don't have a private residence in that destination. So you're not going to be able to quarantine. That means you can't receive the holiday. You can't receive those services, and ultimately that does affect the performance of the package. So I would say that customers are entitled to a full refund if they want to cancel in those circumstances. If the holiday is impacted by social distancing, if it's impacted by closure of attractions or restaurants, people having to wear face masks as mandatory, ultimately, whether the customer would be entitled to cancel and receive a refund will come down to whether that's having a significant impact on the package, and whether that's a significant change to the package. I think some of the measures on their own, probably not. I mean, if you have to go on holiday and you have to wear a face mask, that's not ideal, but I wouldn't say that that's significantly altering a material aspect of the package holiday, and one of the main characteristics, of the holiday. But if there are, the restaurants are closed, if there aren't any attractions open, then, especially if you've booked a city break, for example, and all the attractions in that city are no longer open, then I would say that's a significant change, and you should be entitled to a full refund. One thing that is worth mentioning, actually, is when I was talking about the guidance. There is also guidance from the European Commission, and this was actually published in March, so it was really early on, and it was the guidance where the European Commission was talking about how it does recommend credit notes, and that was basically what the industry sort of picked up on, was this issue of the European Commissioner recommending credit notes. But actually the European Commission also talked about the situations in which it believed customers were entitled to a refund, and one of the examples it actually uses is that of a city break, where all the tourist attractions in that city are closed due to social distancing or due to public health measures, and they would be entitled to a refund in that situation. So, you know, you've just got to, it's got to be actually be assessed on a case-by-case basis, and you've got to assess what the overall impact of those changes are.
So it sounds like it's not going to be black and white in all cases, and you know, and obviously tour operators are going to want to avoid situations with customers, you know, legal disputes. If there are potentially no legal obligations, or if it's not clear, but the tour operator wants to retain some goodwill with the customer, can they potentially agree to try and recover some of the costs from the supplier and refund if successful? Or do you have to be careful in that is potentially admission that you have a right to refund? How can tour operators manage this?
Yeah, no, that is permitted. You can do that, and essentially what you're doing there is you're taking a more generous approach than you need to. So, you know, I don't think that that's an admission, and I don't think it I mean, obviously you've got to look at how you word it when you're communicating it to customers, but I wouldn't say that that is an admission, that a refund, the customer's entitled to a refund. Whether the customer's entitled to a refund in that kind of a situation, as we've said, yes, it probably could be argued, but I think, you know, most of the time you just have to use a common sense approach and a reasonable approach, and think, what would a reasonable customer feel about these changes that are being made to the holiday, and would a reasonable customer think that that's a significant change to their package? The other thing that I should mention as well is that European Commission guidance also talks about the rights around a customer being able to cancel their package holiday if they, you know, if that customer is ill or shielding or in a vulnerable category. So that also needs to be considered as well when a customer is requesting a refund. So it isn't just about what the you know, about the holiday itself. It is actually about the customer too.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. We've had a few questions from some of the attendees that I just would like to ask, if that's okay. So one of the first questions was when you were talking right at the beginning about current obligations and some of the guidance that's come out. They've asked, what about if flight suppliers are not offering a refund on the airfare deposits, as the airlines have not cancelled the scheduled flights? I guess this is quite common where the airlines are still flying, but actually the holiday can't be provided.
Yeah, this is a really tricky situation, because EC 261 only applies where a flight's been cancelled. So if it hasn't been cancelled, then that obligation and that right to a refund doesn't kick in. So that is a really tricky position. I think ultimately you would just have to wait. That's one option really, is in case of waiting it out to see whether closer to the date of departure the flight might be cancelled, at which point you might be entitled to a full refund. But I appreciate that that might not happen, and so, you know, you might end up in a worse off position, but unfortunately there isn't an easy answer to that.
And another question is, are suppliers allowed to charge a handling fee on refund? What is their legal right, or ours, when we have to provide a full refund to clients? Can we charge that handling fee to our clients?
It will come down to the terms and conditions between you and the supplier as to whether they're permitted to charge a handling fee for the refunds. You need to look at what the terms say around non-provision of services or cancelled services and refunds. Whether you can pass on an administration fee will also come down to what it says in your terms and conditions. If what you've said in your terms and conditions is that the customer's entitled to a full refund, then probably you can't pass on and you can't charge an admin fee, because that wouldn't be a full refund. Then it would be a refund less an admin fee. And CMA guidance, although admittedly only applies to single, well, accommodation only, but it did say it didn't expect or it wouldn't expect companies to be charging administration fees in certain circumstances. So I think, but I know that companies are. I know that a lot of companies out there are charging administration fees. The key really is whether it's in your terms and conditions and whether you're permitted to do that or not.
Okay, thank you. I think terms and conditions seems to be coming up a lot in terms with suppliers. We've got another question on suppliers here, which is one of our members has a group booking where the balance is due now. The supplier wants the full payment before making a date change. They've also said that if the trip is cancelled nearer the time, they can change the dates only as a group and not receive any money back. Is that legal? As the customers are saying they will pay the balance by credit card and claim a charge back if it gets cancelled. So again, this is between the relationship between the supplier and the tour operator, I imagine.
Yeah, so that if that's what it is, unless this person's acting as an agent, but otherwise, if it is to do with the supplier and the tour operator, it will come down to what the supplier terms and conditions say. They can't, a supplier cannot unilaterally change terms and conditions that they've agreed already. So if this is sort of changing the payment terms that were agreed in the original contract, that can't be done unilaterally. That can only be done with the tour operator's consent. That's you know, and I think a lot of it as well, you know, is commercial, and it's about sort of what commercial relationship you have with that supplier and whether you can talk to them in this situation and try and come to you know, a sort of something that is acceptable to you both.
Okay, thank you. And you talked earlier about having to bear in mind the customer's vulnerability in taking the trip, and we just asked for clarification. So someone said, could you clarify the point around customers cancelling their trip due to them being, example, being elderly or having asthma? What if the trip is going ahead and it's a year away but they don't want to take the risk?
No, I don't think you would have to refund in that situation because it's still a year away, and we don't know what the situation is going to be like in a year's time, and we don't know whether the virus will still be a risk in a year's time. So I would say that it still only applies to you know, imminent bookings or bookings due to depart. But you know, it's not going to. I wouldn't say it applies to holidays that are a year away.
Okay, thank you, Farina. That's really helpful. So thanks for giving that update. We're going to move on now to Adam, but we might have some more questions for you later, if that's okay, Farina.
That's no problem.
Great, thank you. So Adam, you've been continuing to help your clients managing their cash flow through the current crisis. What's your key advice for our members at the moment on this?
Well, I've got just a quick few slides to run through, Chris, if that's okay.
Thank you, that'd be great.
Let me just share my screen. Okay. So yeah, sorry, can you see that? Is that okay?
Yep.
Brilliant. Good afternoon, everybody. So certainly past webinars and conversations have been about the preservation of cash with a particular focus on reducing cash in the short term, or reducing cash outflows, I should say, but also increasing cash by utilising government assistance, such as the CBILS or bounce back loan scheme. And also, when analysing cash for clients and helping them out, it's certainly been, whether it's for internal or external purposes, most people have been focused on the very short term. However, the consequences of some of these actions are unlikely to be seen this year. And as Matt said, with what appears to be some very early signs of borders opening or airlines preparing to fly, and I think if you haven't already, it's important to now start to look a bit further ahead. Certainly, I think cash flow in the travel industry has been inherently positive for most businesses, and so forecasting hasn't been at the forefront for finance teams. But I think moving forward, it should be a regular feature, even with some uncertainty that still exists. I think the time is to start in now. So to get people thinking, I've just highlighted a few areas which I'll explore in the next couple of slides. 1 second. There we go. So COVID-19 actions. Now, quite a few people have taken out CBILS or a bounce back loan or some of the other schemes that exist. That has certainly provided a nice injection of capital for some people. But if you were early enough, you could see repayments going out in April and May next year. So it's important to know that I think quite quickly that 12-month capital and interest repayment holiday will come to an end. Deferral of tax. Now VAT was automatic. You could have paid it. The thing here for me, I think, is to consider is that actually, if you had a recent year end, either December through March, actually you could have had quite a successful year, and you might well have been doing your year-end TOMS calculation. Now, if you've had an increase in margin, or the mix of margin was more towards EU, then you may have deferred quite a large VAT bill, and so it's important to note that that's going to come around and due to be repaid by the 31st of March 2021. Also, just on that, if you've had a successful year in prior years, your corporation tax bill will still be due technically. December year end will be due as early as 1 October. Anything up to March, pushes it out towards the end of this calendar year, but certainly something that could be quite large and coming down the track. Furlough scheme. Now, obviously, most businesses have taken advantage of the furlough scheme. As we know, it's been extended to the end of July. After that point, hopefully by the end of this month, we will know what that looks like, but we're expecting some sort of taper off to October. But important to build into your cash flow the cost of those staff members starting to come back, or indeed the potential tapering off of the scheme. Refund credit notes. This is probably one of the more worrying areas for me, not to be too negative. As Matt said, refund credit notes were initially advised the 31st of July. That has since been pushed out to when your financial protection ends, so can be pushed partially into 2021. What we're seeing with some clients is actually quite a large portion of those customers taking refund credit notes are effectively putting themselves in a queue for refunds, and so you could have a bit of an exodus of cash at that point, albeit that hopefully if you push into next year, thinking more positively, you might be able to convert those into bookings going forward, which would be far better. Supplier refunds and credit notes. Now, supplier refunds we're seeing on the ground as being incredibly slow, especially with the airlines, and so it's keeping track of those, but build them into your kind of medium-term cash flow when you expect them to come back. But more importantly, I think, is the credit notes. If you're only getting credit notes and certainly not going to get a refund, it's capturing those, but then also, I mean, that will have a positive cash impact next year when you come to rebook. But it's managing, I guess, the redistribution of those credit notes, certainly. And then looking a bit more forward and taking looking at cash flow in terms of that, and extending out this year, or a bit further this year, as we see some of those borders start to open, hopefully some late summer bookings going perhaps. You will have existing bookings. Now, some of those would have been deferred already. Maybe they've deferred and could rebook for late this summer, and then hopefully you'll have some balances come in. But also, if you haven't been collecting balances, depending on your relationship with customers, we certainly have seen that tour operators and travel agents are not necessarily pushing or enforcing the terms where travel is uncertain. And so you've got this shorter window now of balances coming in, so that could, in the short term, provide certainly a cash boost. But also maybe some potential further cancellations. Some tour operators saying that travel won't happen before the middle of June, and so you may still have some to come. It's really analysing those existing bookings and deciding on when they might come back and what that might mean for your cash flow. Now, new bookings, depending on, I think, what starts to happen and some of the measures that we see in place, and that will determine consumer confidence and where and when they're likely to travel. I think if you'd had cash flows in the past, or certainly booking profiles, they can be almost thrown out the window. So it's really looking at what new booking profiles might look like. I would expect that if there are certain measures in place, lead times will be far shorter. That could prove to be quite positive for cash flow, because you'll get full payment on booking, but a lot harder to predict. The other thing that we're seeing clients consider is actually, if you've got refund credit notes and the expectation is that those customers will use those into next summer or next year, that's going to have an effect on what would have been I guess, your repeat customer base, and so actually you might need to be looking for more new customers next year because they haven't had their travel from this year and it's been rolled over. The other one, what we're seeing clients consider is their business model, and certainly looking at what products they sell. We've seen some specialists of foreign countries considering UK and domestic travel. Now that will come with its own, I guess, variables around cash flow and what that might look like. And so if you're considering that, that needs to be put into your cash flow as well. A couple of weeks ago, I think we presented this, and this was a cash flow forecast of a typical, or what we consider to be an illustration of a typical summer tour operator. So just a quick reminder: cash builds through the start of the year, but you have some Easter travel, and then cash builds nicely through the summer, and then depletes as departures go. The dotted line was what cash could have looked like if or with the coronavirus. And here is a bit of an illustration just to kind of really speak about and illustrate some of those points that I've highlighted. So you may have seen a sharp increase in cash because of injections of cash through CBILS or the bounce back loan. We're still seeing cash either increase or remain stable as supplier refunds are coming in, but customers are being given refund credit notes. And so the cash doesn't necessarily go out in these summer months. May even see a bit of an uptick. Most people's overheads or burn rate has been completely reduced, or as reduced as much as possible. So it's not particularly draining cash. But here you start to see, come December and January, here it just illustrates, well, if your refund credit notes weren't converted into new bookings, you potentially got a large decrease in cash, coupled with VAT going out and corporation tax, depending on your year end. So it's really just, I guess, being aware of what could happen and what's coming down the track. As I said, most people have only been looking at daily cash flows or even weekly or monthly cash flows, but not going out really beyond 6 or 9 months initially. I think it's important to start to look a bit further afield. And so certainly, as a summary, forecast preparation is going to be key. Look out beyond 2020 and test scenarios. I fully appreciate that there are a lot of unknowns and a lot of variables in there, but I do think it's important to start to test what the different scenarios could mean for your business and ultimately what that does to cash flow. And that's it from me, Chris.
That's great. Thank you, Adam. That's really helpful. And I'm sure if anyone's got any questions, you wouldn't mind taking them kind of later in the webinar or afterwards if they happen.
No.
Thank you. We have had one just come in. So on refund credit notes, if we've had partial refunds, should we refund these to the customers? So I'm guessing that's from maybe a legal point of view and also a finance point of view.
Maybe hear the legal point of view first. But what I've certainly seen, rightly or wrongly, and I might be corrected by Farina, but initially customers or some of our tour operators have been giving customers refund credit notes for the full value, and then to I guess customers have been becoming increasingly frustrated at the situation, quite rightly. Not always bearing in mind the situation of the tour operator and the fact that they have their hands tied behind their backs most of the time. But to really kind of keep the relationship, tour operators that we've seen are partially refunding, but then issuing a new refund credit note, which takes that into account. And so that's really what we've been seeing, rightly or wrongly.
Yeah, I think in a lot of circumstances, it's particularly if a customer's not happy, I guess it's trying to keep that balance, isn't it, between providing a customer service, but also, managing cash flow at the same time.
Well, exactly. And if you don't do that, then there is an increased risk of chargeback, which,
yes.
Is an even more difficult situation for the tour operator.
Farina, I don't know if perhaps you could just come in and confirm from a legal perspective, there's no, other than obviously the legal black hole that we have on the refund credit notes at the moment, there is no legal obligation, I guess, to refund partially, but there may be from a practical point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I am seeing companies do that where they are partially refunding. Generally, they'll be refunding the accommodation and the ground arrangements, and then they'll give a refund credit note for the flight because that hasn't been received. They haven't received a cash refund from the airline yet, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think I've actually advised clients to do that because, as you said, it's the goodwill impact of it. It's being truthful with the customers, especially if what you're saying is the reason that you can't provide that 14-day that refund within 14 days is because suppliers are holding on to that money. Then actually it isn't entirely true if you've received some of that money that you're holding on to, just not all of it. So generally, I have been advising clients to issue a partial cash refund and then a refund credit note for the amount that they haven't received. It just keeps that goodwill with the customer, reduces the risk of chargebacks. Although I think you can still do a chargeback for a partial refund, but it definitely reduces that risk of it, and it shows the customer that you are being truthful in what you say, which is that you can't provide a refund because we haven't received it from the supplier. So I think it's a good way of dealing with it.
Thanks, Farina, and thanks, Adam, as well. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A function, and we can come back to Farina, Matt or Adam later on in the webinar. But moving on to our guest speaker now, many of you have been asking questions about travel insurance and what it covers, and also about raising concerns about the future, given that many insurers are refusing to cover coronavirus in policies. So we've therefore invited Anthony Kay from Campbell, Irvine to give us an insight into this. Anthony, thank you for joining us today. There's been much confusion in the industry on whether travel insurance should pay out for cancelled holidays. What's been your experience on this, and under what circumstances have you seen claims met by insurers so far?
Chris, well, firstly, thank you very much indeed for inviting me, and very good afternoon to everyone. Wow, it's been an exciting time for everybody. The simple answer to your question in travel insurance, it's had a lot of mixed reviews, is as follows. If the client, the traveling client, has cancelled their itinerary and that itinerary was still going ahead and being performed, then the client is entitled to claim under their travel insurance. However, if the tour operator, airline supplier, it cancels the service, the itinerary, then unfortunately the tour operator, who cannot perform said itinerary, has a legal obligation under the package travel regs to offer the client an alternative, if that's unacceptable, a full refund. Where does that sit with travel insurance? Simple. Every single retail holiday travel insurance policy which contains cancellation cover will do so on the following premise. Cancellation applies for any irrecoverable payments and charges. So what insurers have told us is that if a service is refundable, therefore recoverable, it is not something insurers will pay for. So just to recap, if the client cancels due to an insured reason, client can claim under their travel insurance for a trip that's still going ahead. If you as a tour operator cannot perform the itinerary and you have to cancel, travel insurers will say, well, that is a recoverable payment. Where there is further confusion is if clients have not booked travel arrangements as a package. In those scenarios, it's down to, as Farina said, CMA's, Competition and Markets Authority's view on what is refundable. And then there are certain travel insurance policies with exclusions tucked away in the small print, as often they are, relating to epidemics and pandemics. And then we have further confusion that some policies make reference to travel disruption, which extends to changes in foreign office advice. Again, only where those travel services are booked outside of a package. I think the salient element of this is that as a tour operator, I don't believe you can mitigate your responsibilities in laws under the package travel regs by directing your clients to your travel insurance where you have a legal obligation to refund. And I don't know if Farina has a view on that. But in short, under a travel insurance policy, if the trip is going ahead, the trip is not constrained, and the individual client falls ill, has an accident, or is quarantined on the orders of their treating doctor, these are all perfectly eligible, valid reasons to claim that cost of your itinerary from your travel insurance. And when we talk about cancellations due to changes in foreign office advice for travel services booked out of a package, historically, those sorts of changes in foreign office advice have been restricted to events such as acts of terrorism, which prior to coronavirus was a big concern for everybody, seems to have fallen off the radar now. And then natural disasters, but where governments have said do not travel overseas, full stop. This is the first time any such event has ever happened. It was often joked about that the British government would never advise against Brits travelling to the States for political reasons. Well, there we go, they had it. So Chris, I hope that sort of summarises the variances and why everyone's seen different responses from different insurers.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, we've had some, we've seen some examples where travel insurance has appeared to pay out on packages being cancelled. Is that your experience then, or from what you're seeing, it is strictly as you're saying with the different circumstances?
If you have a package and the tour operator cannot provide the package, then the package travel regulations will prevail, and insurers would deem that those costs are recoverable from your tour operator and would fall outside the scope of a travel insurance policy under the cancellation scale section. That is a reality. Different policies have different wordings. It's no different from different tour operators having different booking conditions. But often with the way of insurers' responses different from every policy, and it gives a mixed bag, mixed review, mixed response, and the consumers seem that take it as being insurers don't know what they're doing. Whilst these are unprecedented circumstances, they do know what they're doing, and it was the intent to provide, as a last resort, reimbursement of a client's travel bookings booked outside of a package where refunds are not recoverable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and one of our attendees on the webinar has pointed out that there are unfortunately some tour operators who are not PTR compliant. So presumably, if they're not complying with the package travel regulations, that could be classed as not being recoverable from that tour operator, and that the travel insurance might pay out. Is that
is a very good point. Yes, we have examples whereby upon receipt of written confirmation, the tour operator will not refund a trip that the tour operator has cancelled. Insurers have, in certain instances, settled a claim in full for cancellation. And I think it depends on the circumstances of the client, the timings, the value of the itinerary, the value of the quantum of the claim. But yes, I have seen exactly the same examples where insurers have been very favourable because they are looking to try and restore some form of dignity in an industry which has had a fair bit of media bashing, especially with things like business interruption claims.
Absolutely. And presumably, if a tour operator has issued refund credit notes, then there definitely would not be any call on the travel insurance because the refund is being promised by the tour operator.
Correct, because it would be deemed by the insurers that the trip hasn't been cancelled, it's merely been transferred to a refund credit note, and the individual traveller is not financially out of pocket at that stage. The intention of the insurance is to indemnify or to put the individual back in a position they were before the incident occurred. And so long as that refund credit note is current, live and valid, the consumer in theory can cash that in and will not be out of pocket.
Okay, thank you. And obviously the tour operators are managing bookings kind of, on a 3-week basis because the situation is unclear as to when people can start traveling. But if you've got a customer who doesn't want to wait, who's due to travel in 3 to 4 months, for example, and doesn't want to wait until that time for that decision on whether they'll be going or not, can they, if they choose to cancel now, do they potentially have a claim on the travel insurance now for that?
That's a very good question. There is a fine balance between an individual's disinclination to travel, whereby they simply choose, having read the Daily Mail, that they don't want to travel because when they get there, the pubs won't all be open and they don't fancy sunbathing wearing a face mask. And then there's the reality of an individual who is in a vulnerable category, whom for potentially medical reasons is not able to travel in 2-3 months' time. So the advice we are giving is simple. If you have a client who is uncertain about the trip in X months' time, 3, 4, 5 months' time, when it's highly likely that some form of travel will go ahead, notwithstanding government decisions to ask people to quarantine, I think so long as they have medical reason, there is medical evidence that there is an illness that is preventing them from traveling, or that illness may deteriorate upon travel, and their GP has confirmed it's medically inadvisable for the individual to travel, I would actively encourage them to make a claim under the cancellation section of their travel insurance. So if somebody can't evidence from their GP the medical reason for not travelling, I think you're going to find the claim will fall outside the policy terms and receive a declinature. But if there is medical evidence, that's what triggers a valid cancellation claim under a travel insurance policy.
Thanks for clarifying that. That's great. And kind of looking to the future now, obviously we keep talking about the bounce back and when borders start to open and airlines start to operate. Many people are concerned about making sure they have cover in place for when they do travel. And there's been a lot of media coverage about travel insurance not being available for those to travel. Is that what you're seeing at the moment?
That's again an excellent question. The reality is as follows. According to a Which report published beginning of April, 65% of retail travel insurers have stopped selling travel insurance in the United Kingdom. So the balance, the 35% left over, are still actively offering travel insurance with certain caveats and restrictions. So the simple answer is yes, that 35% of travel insurers still providing policies. Your clients still buy an active valid policy and should have full cover should they travel and they fall ill, break a leg, so on and so forth. But here is the caveat. Until the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office lifts its universal restriction advising against British nationals from travel overseas, those policies will not provide cover. Universally, travel insurers will not provide cover where the Foreign Office says don't go. So we need that to be lifted in the first instance. And I'm just so you're aware, I'm writing to Jennifer Anderson, who's the head of the Foreign Office Consular Advisory Service, to establish if they can give us any indication of what their process or plans, or whether they will give us any heads up information prior to just reading it on a website one day published from the Foreign Office. So travel insurance is available, but they fall into two categories, those policies that are available. Those with blanket coronavirus exclusions applicable to all sections of the policy, and those which simply exclude coronavirus related claims regarding cancellation and curtailment. So what we would advise your clients to do is to ensure that the policy that they have in place covers them when the Foreign Office lifts its restriction, and it will provide medical, emergency and repatriation cover in relation to coronavirus COVID-19. So it should give your members and clients confidence to proceed with the booking and to travel once the restrictions are lifted. Policies are available, and every day we have conversations with certain insurers who are looking to join in and provide medical expenses cover in relation to coronavirus. So a bit of positive news.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, the fact that 35% are still providing cover, is something. And presumably, maybe when the FCO do change their advice, that 35% might increase because we'll have more clarity on the situation going forward. Would you anticipate that?
Yes. I don't honestly think we're going to go back to the full 100%.
No.
The damage has been done to the insurance market and travel insurance market especially. It sent shockwaves through everything, but I wouldn't be surprised if we get 70 to 80% of those former insurers writing cover with some form of coronavirus cancellation restriction. Cancellation curtailment claims are being excluded in relation to coronavirus, as insurers say it's a known event. You insure against unforeseen circumstances.
Yeah.
So the trigger is the sequence of events. Foreign Office must first lift its advice, and the destination countries must welcome Brits in open arms. We all need to get around the fact that social distancing on commercial aircraft is not commercially viable, and that the travelling public's expectations need to be met, that there's nothing wrong with going to destination and wearing a face mask. It was touched on earlier, loss of enjoyment. I didn't get what I thought I was going to get because I had to social distance around the pool, or the queue to get into to see whatever event, museum was longer than anticipated. Well, that is the harsh reality of travel for the foreseeable future.
And so in terms of, you talked about obviously tour operators reassuring their customers by asking, customers what to look out for in the policy. If they're not able to get a policy, are you, do tour operators need to highlight the key risks of those wanting still to travel? Is there an obligation on them to do that? That should they be preparing their customers for, as you've just mentioned, masks, social distancing?
Very good. Right. So in short, most tour operators will put in their booking conditions. We strongly recommend the benefits of taking out travel insurance when you book with us. Some tour operators make it mandatory that you must have adequate travel insurance in which to travel with us. Each operator is different. It depends on whether it's an activity itinerary or a sightseeing leisure or fly and flop. From the world of insurers, their view is, I think tour operators must advise their clients, in accordance to the PTRs, the benefits of taking out insurance. And rather than relying on the small print or getting someone to fill in a box, to engage proactively with your clients and say, look, if you have insurance historically provided to you by your package bank account, or you go online and type in cheap travel insurance to go compare your Meerkat, I would think again, search around, don't be ashamed, pick up a phone, speak to your travel insurers and get confirmation that the policy that you bought is appropriate for requirements. Insurers are very happy to engage. If the client's insurance isn't appropriate because there is a blanket coronavirus exclusion, then shop around. There are plenty of products providers still offering terms, and each day goes past, that will increase. I think the only individuals who are really going to struggle to find insurance are those who have been advised by their doctor not to travel. That's it in a nutshell. So those who have been asked to remain at home and self-isolate, that's going to be difficult because insurers do not encourage individuals to travel against medical advice. Yeah. So engage with clients, get them to check the policy cover they've got. If you rely on an email to clients that says insurance is an important component part, please tick here to confirm you've got it. I would suggest you might want to proactively engage with those clients and go a step further and say, have you checked with your insurer that the policy that you have in place is appropriate? Things to consider, are there restrictions or exclusions? In terms of face masks, that's probably down to the local authorities and guidance in destination.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think, you know, some people seem to forget that, you know, you're an insurance intermediary, you're not the big corporate insurer in the background. And so your industry must have been hit hard as well. How have you been coping?
It's been brutal, I think. We haven't got the voice of the likes of ABTA or ATO or what have you, banging a drum. We're a privately owned company with 70 odd staff. My entire sales and marketing team have been furloughed. We have a negative position for the period of April with policy refunds and zero policy sales. Clients are not renewing their policy, they're waiting, and it's hurting cash flow. You know, it's no joke. We're applying to the government for one of these interest-free government-backed loans. It's been brutal, I think. It's emotional as well. We've been talking with our tour operator clients who are, over the period of time, being friends, who are worried for their business, the initial scenario. And it's emotional talking to individual travellers stranded who are overseas with no inkling as to when they can get home, who are genuinely scared. So it's been a roller coaster, but credit to the team, they've soldiered on. And I think we're now at a period where we are thinking of the future. We're forecasting more long-term than what are we going to do next day, what's in the bank next day. But we're fortunately, we're a robust business and we will prevail. But I wouldn't say we're the unsung heroes, but we're certainly not the large fat cat corporate insurance companies who sit there and instantly have a view on everything. We're the ones at the coalface, very much like tour operators. So thank you for asking.
Absolutely, and thank you for joining us, because obviously, you know, we know you're extremely busy. But just before we wrap up, I mean, you've been in the travel industry over 20 years, from what I understand, and obviously you deal, as you said, you deal with a large number of tour operators. What are your thoughts on the future of travel and how we can bounce back from this?
I think you can bounce back. I'm going to be very cautiously optimistic. The infrastructure is in place. Credit to tour operators up and down the country. You guys do a brilliant job. You know exactly what you do. Day in, day out, you provide amazing itineraries for your clients. But clients are scared. They're scared of the unknown. They're scared of what happens if there is a failure. How does it happen? Dare I say it, one of the most complicated things ever invented was financial protection of holidays, but there we go. That's not the subject for today. Your clients want confidence. They want flexibility. They want to be assured if something goes wrong, there is a helping hand. And I think tour operators are now in a much better position because the travelling public, I think, for the first time ever, have a better understanding of the benefits of booking a package as opposed to self-booking. I think insurance is available, so that should not be a barrier. I think flexibility is the word of the day. So provided the Foreign Office lifts its advice in line with certain EU countries, there is a talk of a continental-wide sort of 15th of July onwards, we will get a flicker of hope that late summer departures will be a reality. Obviously, protect cash where possible. Cash is king. I'm not here to teach you how to run your businesses, but my goodness, it's important. Stay positive, stay focused. Communication, communicate with your clients, communicate with the staff. It's what it's all about, especially if you have staff who are furloughed. You may not fully understand what's going on. Engage with them periodically. More for Ina's line, but you know, review contracts with suppliers, review your booking conditions. That's the best advice anyone can give. Choose your airlines carefully. If you have a choice between airlines, if one airline has proven itself to be more engaging, mentioning no name, South African Airlines, it's your choice. A good tour operator only deals with suppliers who have good reputations. Not always possible, but bear that in mind. Obviously, product will be dependent on destinations opening their borders, and only time will tell. I'm not a soothsayer, I can't foresee the future, but there is general feedback that now destination countries are desperate to rekindle their own economies, providing it can be done in a safe and structured manner. Flexibility in terms of, I was talking to a tour operator recently who's instigated a coronavirus COVID-19 refund flexible policy. When you book with us, the deposit is what was it, 10%, that's theirs, but up until the day prior to departure, they'll give you a COVID guarantee. They'll make good of all monies prior to departure if that trip can't go ahead. Innovative ideas like that are great if you can structure something that doesn't penalise your business, because any booking is a good booking. It helps that mantra, cash is king. We as a business, we're looking, and we were going to be looking to expand into new office space. I think we're now looking to almost downsize with the invent of home working being a tried and tested formula for us. It sort of works. Saving money on expensive office space and investing in staff is probably a good idea. But insurance will evolve. The insurance products will evolve, and engage with us as the insurance industry. Tell us what risks you would ideally like covered. Will the package travel regulations change? What extent, and how will that be reflected in travel insurance policies? These are all good things to ponder, but I am optimistic. I think we live in a small island. We've got a bit of cabin fever, and your clients remain loyal. They want to book, notwithstanding the problems that some of them have faced. I think the mature, vulnerable demographic will take longer to come back online, and I believe certain elements of travel will take longer to come back online, whether that is the schools market, the cruise market, we just don't know, but it won't be a switch. It will take a staged approach, and I think so long as social distancing on airlines isn't a thing, I think there's every possibility we will recoup some of the loss of bookings this year in the second half of the year. So positive, I think, is the outcome.
Thanks, Anthony. That's really helpful. It's nice to have. It's nice to end on a positive note as well. So thank you very much for taking the time. We have gone over our hour, so I'm conscious that other people may have other meetings to go to, but thank you so much for joining us. It's been really interesting insight, and thank you to all of our other panelists as well. As I said, we have recorded the webinar, and it will be on our YouTube channel later, and we will also be sending out details of our next webinar next week. But thank you, everyone. Goodbye.